How often do hand hits happen in a real sword fight? Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. So first up, this question comes from Nico Theos, and it's a great question, and as you guys know, when I get good questions underneath my videos, sometimes I think, that'll make a good video, and this is one of these. Well, I hope it'll be a good video anyway. I will try to keep this fairly concise because it could be a spiralingly huge, massive topic, and I don't want it to be that. But fundamentally, I thought about this, and I thought, okay, let's break this down into really simple terms. First of all, how often do hand hits happen in combat? First of all, it depends. Are you talking about battlefield skirmishing type stuff, or are you talking about a duel? That's the first differentiation. And secondly, are you talking about deliberate hits, so deliberately targeting the hand, or accidental hits? So first up, let's just talk very briefly about sword evolution. It is very clear that in the early days, swords, if we go all the way back to the Roman era, don't really have any handguard to speak of at all, but they're pretty much always used with large shields. You just don't really see swords used by themselves unless the shield has for some reason been broken or dropped or something else, but they're not intended or designed to be used without a shield. As we get into the medieval period, we get longer crossguards. Again, it's not a straightforward equation, and there are many possible reasons why that happens, but fundamentally you get more hand protection. As we go later in the medieval period, we get a couple of things added, one of those sometimes being a finger ring, which is to do with a change in the grip of the sword, and then also we start to get side rings, side bars and things like this, and ultimately by the 1500s, that is the 16th century, this starts to develop into the early forms of the basket hilt. Now clearly the basket hilt protects the hand. Now first of all, we have to say it doesn't necessarily only protect the hand because of deliberate targeting of the hand, it can also happen because of accidental targeting of the hand. Also, remember the differentiation between war and civilian life. Now what's interesting is when basket hilts first start to appear, in fact, cross hilts are still around. People just don't make an immediate switch, and it's very clear that people who wore full armour still in the 16th century tended to prefer cross-hilted swords because, surprise, surprise, they're wearing gauntlets most of the time, and even those who aren't, most of them still had cross-hilted swords of various types, sometimes with a simple side ring or a finger ring, and sometimes a knuckle bow. But we already see knuckle bows and side rings and side bars and nagels, as they're called on Langmesser, already in the 15th century. So already, really quite early in the 15th century, we start to see the first appearances of knuckle bows, and then we get side rings towards the end of the 15th century. So in the 1400s, we start to get additions to protect the hand. So coming back to the original question, how often do hand hits happen in combat? Well, first of all, I would say my general impression from reading numerous hundreds of sources over the years, both 19th century, 18th century, all the way back 17th, 16th, 15th, 14th, all the way back into the Middle Ages, is that hand hits definitely happened a lot. Now, differentiating between a deliberate hand hit and an accidental hand hit can be sometimes difficult because obviously if a person is recounting, or if it's recorded that the person was injured in the hand, there's often no way of telling whether the person attacking them was doing it deliberately or accidentally. But we can look at the period fencing treatises and fencing advice. One of the clearest and most often cited examples is Antonio Manciolino in 1531, and he, in his advice for using the side sword, which is really basically an arming sword with very often with the addition of a side ring, sometimes with a knuckle bow, very often with a finger ring or pair of finger rings. So it's got some additional protection to the hand, but not as much as later rapiers like that there. Okay, so that's like one step on in development. So it has some hand protection, but the hand is still vulnerable to certain things. And what he notes is that you target the hand because that's the thing that's closest to you and offends you the most. That is, it's the thing that holds the weapon and is trying to get you. Okay, so there is advice, but he's talking about one-on-one combat. Okay, now my observation in sparring and like simulated dueling type situations, tournaments and stuff like that, is that if someone doesn't have hand protection, the hand is a prime target. Even when I'm doing knife fighting stuff and advising people on what to do with their knives, if they're large-ish knives, Bowie knives and things like that, then the hand is targeted. We see the hand targeted even in armoured fighting. In various treatises, we see the inside of the gauntlet targeted, we see the back of the gauntlet into the cuff targeted. In Paulus Cal with dagger techniques, we see the hand targeted. We see the hand lopped off, so more the wrist rather than the hand, in Talhofer. There's plenty of examples. So there's loads of examples in period treatises of the hand deliberately being targeted. But statistically, even more common than that, is accidentally hitting the hand. So very often, especially you'll notice with a knuckle bow, if you put a flinch response guard in and you happen to get your hand in the way, the blade will come down and hit the knuckle bow. That's one of the great things about knuckle bows and saber hilts, is that they are in front of the hand and protect it either to a deliberately targeting of the hand or just accidental because you messed up your parry. With a cross hilt, something that happens often, and that you'll ask any reenactor, they all know people who've had broken fingers, and many of them have had broken fingers, because in reenactment fighting with cross-hilted swords or Viking era swords, very often someone will just mess up or put their hand in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they'll get a load of steel in the hand, which if you're not wearing gauntlets is, breaks a finger pretty easily. So it can happen accidentally, it can happen deliberately. My observation is that it happens more in one-on-one combat than it necessarily does in massed combat. And interestingly, there is more suggestion, if we look at the historical sources, there's more suggestion that it happened more often in single combat than it necessarily did in battlefield stuff. Why might that be? Well, think about the context here. Imagine you've got a sword and you're fighting one opponent, and you're skirting around each other. There's no time constraints, there hopefully no space constraints, no one else is going to get involved in the fight. It's a one-on-one duel. You are looking for any small things at maximum range that you can do to disadvantage or potentially incapacitate that opponent. That means there's going to be a lot of sniping going on. There's going to be obviously feints, pretending to attack one place and then actually attacking somewhere else. There's going to be trying to get to the hand if you possibly can, even thrusting at the hand as well. Doesn't only have to be a cut. Leg cuts, things like this. Completely different situation to if it's a massed brawl involving a number of people, either on a battlefield or a street fight or a fight in an inn or whatever. A group of people who are fighting, one of the prime considerations, and this applies to modern street fights or modern pub fights or whatever, is the danger of the other people. You're not only thinking about the person in front of you like you are in a duel, but you're also thinking about the threats which might come from anywhere, who might be even more dangerous than the one who's in front of you at the moment. So therefore, one of your priorities in a massed melee, massed fight, skirmish, battle, is to try and incapacitate the person in front of you, if they're your immediate threat, as quickly as possible. Now, if you want to incapacitate someone as quickly as possible, chopping them in the hand or chopping their hand off, yes indeed it may achieve that. However, it might not, and there's a good chance it might not, and they might still continue to be a threat, because when you hit someone in the hand, you never really know how much effect it's going to have. It might chop their hand in half and mean that they're completely disarmed and they can't use that hand. Obviously, if you lop the hand off, that's going to have the same effect. But if they're wearing any kind of gloves, even if they're not wearing gloves, even if it's bare flesh, you might take a chunk of their hand off, but they might still be holding their weapon enough to swing it at you or thrust at you or whatever. So in a duel, you can think about taking someone apart piece by piece. You can think about incapacitating them, their hand, and then running them through the body, or chopping their head off, or chopping their leg off, or arm off, or whatever. In a fight involving multiple potential opponents, your priority is to take out that person as quickly as possible. Now, my observation is this even relates to modern fights involving fists, okay, and punching and kicking and wrestling. Often people go for a higher risk but more incapacitating, or more certainly incapacitating, deeper target. So in this type of high stress, high intensity, high high data input situation, my belief is that people more often will go for the body thrust. They'll more often go for the head hit more than they would in a one-on-one duel where you've got time and space to play around with the situation and try and find an opening at your leisure, so to speak. Obviously, even in a duel, if someone charges in on you, so say for example you're just standing on guard and you're ready and you're thinking, well, I'm a better fencer than this person, and that person basically crosses your sword and charges in to wrestle because they maybe know you're a better swordsman, but they know they're a better wrestler. In that moment, are you able to wound their hand? No, not really, not usually. At that point, it's like, ah, crap, okay, you're being wrestled. And at that point, you're now into half swording, pommeling, counter wrestling, trying to go for a hip throw, trying to divert their motion. Or potentially just like, ramming your blade through their gut or smashing them on the head with the blade or this kind of stuff. So there's a kind of crossover there. And I'm not saying that in a one-on-one fight you always have the leisure to go for the hands, because you don't. Depending on your opponent, you might not. You might have to go for the deep targets. Equally, there might be other scenarios in a one-on-one fight which mean that you want to get it over and done quickly. And, one that gets overlooked is legal repercussions. The fact is, for most of history, dueling was illegal. Even in most medieval cities, having a duel over a matter of honour for a common person was illegal. And if you killed them, it wasn't self-defence, you'd arranged to be there. So that was murder. And whether you view this in legal sense or even religious sense, that was frowned on, and there are various texts written about it in the 16th and 17th centuries about the evils of dueling, the vices of dueling, and how this was the work of Satan. So for many reasons, you might want to get it over and done quickly. If you watch any of the Three Musketeers movies, for example, you'll know that they want to get the duel over and done quickly before the law keepers turn up to arrest them, this kind of stuff. So even in a one-on-one duel, there might be situations where you don't simply just want to go for the hand, and why you might want to go for a deep target. That being said, I don't want you to think that I'm saying that chopping someone's hand off isn't incapacitating and won't end a fight. It does, and it can. I just think that if we look at overall tendencies, then when we look at battlefield skirmish, bar brawl, this type of thing, you're more likely to see people swinging for deep targets straight off the bat with no preliminaries, no trying to incapacitate the arm, this kind of stuff, just going straight for the deep targets. There's another element to talk about here, and that's psychology. I think most people are able to keep sang-froid, as the French would say, cool-blooded, in a duel, especially if they're confident in their swordsmanship and their fencing skills. It's easier in a one-on-one situation to stay cool-headed than it is in a situation that's complete mayhem, massed melee, and people butchering each other all around you. And I think that affects your psychology as well. And when things affect your psychology, they affect how you attack. And I've talked about this in application specifically to the rondel dagger before as well. And whereas in the modern world, we see about 80% of people stab like that and 20% of people stab like that. In the medieval treatises, it's kind of the opposite. 80% of stabs like that and 20% are like that. And I think it's because of a change of context also. Changes of weapon, changes of clothes, changes of training and experience and culture. But I think also getting your blood up and getting stressed plays a part in this. If we look at modern crime reports, we notice that in domestic violence stabbings, they are very often with a kitchen knife or screwdriver or whatever, done like this, like Psycho, like in the movie Psycho, Hitchcock movie. So under stress, people do the caveman or the gorilla thing of this motion. It's the same as grabbing a stick or a sword and resorting to this, like we read about in Napoleonic sources. But we taught them to thrust, and then under pressure they did this. It's because it's fundamentally, it's ingrained in our evolution. So this seems to be a more natural thing to do, although if we look at prison shankings and gang stabbings, they're predominantly done like this because it's premeditated and cold-blooded. So, to come back to the original question, how often were hands targeted in real sword fights? I think in certain types of sword fights, hands were extensively targeted. We read about it in dueling accounts. We read about people being injured in the hands. In the treatises, we see advice about attacking the hands and the wrist, obviously further up the arm as well in other techniques. So incapacitating the sword arm or sword hand, absolutely it's there loads. But I would caveat that with saying that in battlefield stuff, particularly in certainly in the medieval and Renaissance periods when hand weapons were very prevalent and were very widely used, sort of before gunpowder was, before everyone had guns basically. I think in that period, I think that you would find that in a typical battlefield or melee situation, the majority of targets that people are going for from the outset are deep targets, straight for the head, straight for the gut, this kind of thing. So, if you disagree with me, that's absolutely fine, and I'm interested to read your reasoning and stuff like that down below. If you've got other thoughts, things I should have mentioned, other points I could have made on this topic, again, I'm very, very happy to see your comments underneath, and who knows, you might be the next person who inspires a new video. So, thanks for watching. I have been Matt Easton. I certainly will be again next time as well. Make sure that you're subscribed, tick that like button. It means a lot to me. It makes a lot of difference to the channel and helps support the channel as well with the algorithm and all of that. And get commenting as well. Get discussing things with each other. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Cheers, folks.